I never expected to be the one to take down our neighborhood's notorious HOA president, but life has a way of putting you exactly where you need to be. My name is Michael, and I've been a police detective for 15 years, though most of my neighbors in Oakwood Estates, where I've lived for 6 months, don't know that. I prefer to keep a low profile, especially since we chose this neighborhood for its tranquility and well-maintained appearance, as well as its proximity to the hospital where my sister-in-law Jenny is undergoing cancer treatments. When my brother Tom called me in tears, explaining that Jenny's condition had worsened and they needed help with their kids, my wife Sarah and I didn't hesitate. We invited Tom, Jenny, and their 2 children, Emma and Noel, to move in with us temporarily. Our house was spacious, and this arrangement would allow Jenny to continue her treatment while Tom focused on supporting her without worrying about the children. It seemed like the perfect solution until we encountered Karen Whitfield, the HOA president. The first confrontation occurred just 3 days after my brother's family moved in. I was helping Tom unload some of Jenny's medical equipment when a silver Mercedes pulled into our driveway, blocking us in. A woman with a blonde bob and oversized sunglasses stepped out, clutching a clipboard in hand. Her face was already set in a disapproving frown. "Excuse me, what exactly is going on here?" she said, her icy tone indicating this wasn't a friendly inquiry. "I've received multiple reports about unusual activity and extra vehicles at this address," she continued as I stepped forward, extending my hand. "Hi, I'm Michael Reynolds. We've had family move in temporarily due to a medical situation." She ignored my outstretched hand and flipped through her clipboard. "I'm Karen Whitfield, president of the Oakwood Estates HOA. According to our bylaws, Section 4, Paragraph 7 clearly states that residences are single-family dwellings. You can't just move people in without proper authorization." Tom, exhausted from a taxing hospital visit earlier that day, stepped forward. "My wife has stage 4 cancer. We're just trying to..." Karen cut him off with a dismissive wave of her hand. "I'm sorry about your wife, truly, but rules are rules. You have 72 hours to file the proper paperwork and request a variance, or you'll be fined $500 per day." She handed me a stack of forms before I could respond and stomped back to her car, speeding away. I turned to Tom, whose face had fallen. "Don't worry about her," I assured him. "Focus on Jenny. I'll handle the paperwork." What I didn't tell him was that I had already researched the HOA's bylaws thoroughly and knew perfectly well that temporary family stays for medical reasons were explicitly permitted without prior approval. The next morning, I dropped off the completed forms in Karen's mailbox, along with a printed copy of the bylaw exception highlighted in yellow. I thought that would be the end of it. I was sorely mistaken. 3 days later, a violation notice appeared on our door, charging us for excessive vehicles parked in our driveway and for medical equipment visible from the street, each carrying a $200 fine. This was getting ridiculous. We had precisely 4 vehicles, mine, my wife's, Tom's, and a medical transport van that came twice weekly for Jenny's treatments, all parked legally in our driveway or garage. As for the medical equipment, it was merely a portable wheelchair ramp that we folded and stored after use. I called the number on the violation notice, and Karen answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Whitfield, this is Michael Reynolds. There seems to be a misunderstanding about the violation notices." "There's no misunderstanding, Mr. Reynolds," she stated condescendingly. "I drove by your house yesterday and counted 5 vehicles. That's 3 more than allowed per household according to Section 8 of our covenant. There were only 4 vehicles, all belonging to residents, which is within the limits," I replied calmly. "And the medical equipment you cited is a temporary accommodation protected under the Fair Housing Act." Silence hung in the air for a moment before Karen spoke again, her voice dripping with disdain. "Well, aren't you quite the expert? I've been running this HOA for 7 years, and I don't appreciate newcomers telling me how to interpret our rules. The fines stand. If you have a problem with that, you can bring it up at the next board meeting in 2 weeks. I took a deep breath. I'll be there, I said before hanging up. I then spent the next hour researching HOA regulations and the limitations of their authority. As a detective, I knew how to build a case, and Karen was about to learn that she'd picked the wrong family to harass. The situation escalated rapidly over the following week. I received 2 more violation notices, one for unauthorized landscape modifications, when Tom planted some bright flowers to cheer Jenny up, and another for noise disturbance when Emma and Noah were playing joyfully in Ethan's backyard. Each came with another $200 fine. But what really crossed the line was when Karen sent a letter to all the neighbors, implying there were health concerns in our household and suggesting they keep their distance for safety reasons. Tom found Jenny sobbing in the bedroom, the letter clutched in her hand. "Everyone will think I'm contagious," she cried. Tom was furious, and honestly, so was I. This wasn't just petty rule enforcement anymore. Karen was deliberately trying to isolate a vulnerable family dealing with cancer. That evening, I called my lieutenant and took a few days of accumulated leave. This had become personal, and I needed to handle it properly. The next morning, I donned the suit I usually reserved for court appearances and drove to Karen's workplace, a prestigious real estate firm downtown. I waited patiently in the reception area until she emerged from her office with clients. The moment she spotted me, her smile faltered. "Mr. Reynolds, what are you doing here?" "I was hoping we could discuss the letters you sent to our neighbors regarding my sister-in-law's health condition," I said, acutely aware of her client's curious glances. Karen's face flushed as she quickly ushered her clients toward another agent. "Take them to see the lakeside property," she instructed before turning back to me with narrowed eyes. "My office now." Once the door closed behind us, her professional demeanor vanished. "How dare you come to my workplace? This is harassment." I smiled calmly as I placed my badge on her desk. "Actually, Mrs. Whitfield, spreading false medical information about my sister-in-law and attempting to socially isolate a cancer patient could be considered harassment, not to mention a violation of medical privacy laws." Her eyes widened at the sight of my badge. "You're a cop? What does that have to do with anything?" "The HOA rules still apply to you, detective." "Actually," I replied, "legitimate rules do apply to everyone. But fabricating violations and using your position to discriminate against a family because of a medical condition crosses several legal lines." I placed a folder on her desk. "This contains copies of all your violation notices alongside the relevant bylaws that contradict them. It also includes the letter you sent to our neighbors, which contains false medical claims." Karen's confidence wavered for the first time. "Are you threatening me?" "Not at all," I said. "I'm simply informing you that your actions have consequences. I've already filed a formal complaint with the HOA board and the State Housing Authority, citing harassment and discrimination against a family with a serious medical condition. I'm giving you this copy as a professional courtesy." She scoffed, regaining some composure. "The board won't do anything. They always back me up." "Perhaps. But the Housing Authority takes discrimination very seriously, especially when it affects someone with a disability or medical condition. The fines for such violations start at $10,000. I stood up and collected my badge. I'd suggest retracting those violation notices and sending a correction to the neighbors about your previous letter. It would go a long way toward demonstrating good faith. For once, Karen seemed speechless. As I turned to leave, she found her voice again. "This isn't over, Reynolds." I paused at the door. "For your sake, Mrs. Whitfield, I hope it is." However, Karen didn't back down. The next day, when the medical transport arrived to take Jenny to her treatment, we discovered that someone had called a tow truck to remove the unauthorized vehicle from our driveway. I had to intervene, showing my badge to prevent them from towing the medical transport, but Jenny missed her appointment and had to reschedule, causing her unnecessary stress and pain. That was the final straw. I contacted a lawyer friend specializing in housing discrimination and laid out everything that had happened. He confirmed my suspicions. Karen's actions had gone well beyond overzealous HOA enforcement. They constituted harassment and discrimination under both state law and the Fair Housing Act. With his assistance, I filed a formal legal complaint and requested an emergency injunction against the HOA to prevent further harassment. 2 days later, while working from home, I heard a commotion outside. Karen was standing on our lawn, taking photos of the house and arguing with my wife, who had asked her to leave our property. "This is a public easement," Karen said smugly. "I have every right to document violations." I stepped outside just as she turned her camera toward the window where Jenny was resting. "Mrs. Whitfield," I called out, "you've been served with a temporary restraining order prohibiting you from approaching this house or contacting anyone in this family. You're currently in violation of that order." She spun around, her face contorted with rage. "You can't be serious. I'm conducting official HOA business." "No," I replied, holding up a copy of the order. "The court doesn't see it that way." "I also have the officer parked across the street who's been documenting your trespass for the past 5 minutes." As if on cue, a patrol car pulled up, and Officer Rodriguez, a colleague of mine, stepped out. "Is there a problem here, Detective Reynolds?" Karen's face paled as she looked from me to the officer. "Detective, you've been lying about who you are this whole time." "I never lied about my profession, Mrs. Whitfield. You simply never asked." I nodded to Rodriguez. "This is the individual named in the restraining order who's currently in violation." Karen backed away, pointing a finger at me. "This is ridiculous. You can't arrest someone for enforcing community standards." "No," Rodriguez agreed as he approached her, "but we can arrest someone for violating a court order. Harassment and criminal mischief, especially when you've contacted a tow company with false information to remove a medical transport vehicle, crosses the line from civil into criminal territory." As Rodriguez read Karen her rights and placed her in handcuffs, neighbors began emerging from their homes, watching in shock as the HOA president was escorted to the patrol car. Karen's face was a mask of disbelief and fury as she was placed in the back seat. The next day, a special emergency meeting of the HOA board was called. Karen, released on bail but facing criminal charges for harassment and interfering with medical services, sat stone-faced as the board unanimously voted to remove her as president and issue a formal apology to our family. The fines she had issued were invalidated, and she was ordered to pay for Jenny's rescheduled medical transport and treatment costs out of her own pocket. As the new interim board president announced the $5,000 restitution Karen would personally owe, plus the legal fees for the HOA's attorney to manage the discrimination complaint, her composed facade finally cracked. "This is absurd," she shouted, rising to her feet. "I've given 7 years to this community. I've maintained property values and standards, and this is the thanks I get." Her voice broke as she gestured wildly around the room. "You'll regret this when your property values plummet because people start turning their homes into hospitals and flufhouses." The room fell silent as her words hung in the air, revealing the true nature of her concerns all along. It had never been about rules or community standards. It had been about her perception of what gave a neighborhood value, and in her mind, a family dealing with illness didn't make the cut. The interim president cleared his throat. "I believe that concludes our business here today, Karen. You'll be receiving formal documentation of the board's decision and restitution requirements within 24 hours. As Karen gathered her things, her hands shaking with rage, she locked eyes with me one last time. The realization that her petty power trips had cost her position, reputation, and now thousands of dollars seemed to finally sink in. Her mouth opened as if to deliver one final threat, but instead she simply shook her head and stormed out of the meeting room, the door slamming behind her with a finality that matched the judge's gavel.